In the digital reality, evolution over revolution prevails. The QA approaches and techniques that worked yesterday will fail you tomorrow. So free your mind. The automation cyborg has been sent back in time. TED speaker Jonathon Wright's mission is to help you save the future from bad software.
Hey, and welcome to the show. Today I have a very special guest who I've known for a very long time. He's a good friend of mine, Eran. He's the chief evangelist and author for Perfecto, and also, which is now Perforce Software. You know, he's written a number of books. I was lucky to be part of the Digital Quality Handbook. He's just put a latest one out on continuous testing for DevOps professional. Definitely recommend checking that one out. He's the most knowledgeable person in the world when it comes to mobile. So we're going to find out what he's working on now, new books, next generation technology, exciting times. Hey, Eran.
Hey, Jonathan. Excited to be here, and thank you for inviting me. Hopefully it will be a nice Q&A, and bring it on.
Absolutely. And you were the first person I reached out to when I was thinking about setting up this podcast. And, I was sat watching your trends for 2020, and I was just blown away with kind of some of the stuff you've been working on in AI and testing and QA. Would you be able to tell the listeners a little bit about the kind of exciting things you've been working on?
Sure. So obviously I'm working on a third book, which I cannot say that much about right now, but stay tuned, follow me. The thing that I am able to talk about and are obviously becoming reality and will be coming even more real to all of the testing practitioners out there is everything that is related to AI and machine learning. This is no longer, a buzzword or a trend. I actually am working and involved in projects that are AI and machine learning driven. As mentioned, I am working right now and for the past 8 years at Perfecto, which is a Perforce company. In the Perfecto product itself, I can mention that we have in the reporting an automated root cause analysis that is driven by machine learning algorithms. We have a codeless Selenium, which is based on record and playback with self-healing mechanism. So it's also machine learning. But it's not just about, what I work on and in Perfecto. We see a lot of new technologies and tools. KK from CloudBees just announced that is launching a scriptless test automation creation that is risk-based. It can scan through Jenkins and all the other code changes that are happening in the pipeline, and based on the changes, create relevant scripts that will save you time from, developing, running, and maintaining scripts that are maybe no longer relevant. So AI and machine learning in testing is definitely happening and will receive a huge boost in 2020. Second thing that I'm looking at right now, I started looking into it in early 2019, and I start to see it becoming even more real, is everything that is about the conversion between mobile and web in the form of progressive websites. So this is another topic that is becoming popular, PWA. And the third one is around foldable smartphones and how they evolve and become an equal citizen in the mobile testing or mobile industry that we live in today. So, Jonathan, I'm happy to uncover specifics of each of these three trends. There are many more, but if you want, we can start with talking about one or few of these ones that I just mentioned.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'm really excited about foldables. I know there's probably only a few people that are, but it always reminds me of this great interaction I had with you guys. So I was working for a large pizza retailer, and we were looking at, if you remember back in the time when the iOS watch came out, and I remember saying to you, how quickly can you get one of those devices and get it docked into your system? And you guys were the first that were there. And, part of what the company wanted, the pizza companies, they wanted to be the first on the App Store. And it's kind of, to me, that was like a second screen technology because, even though the functionality of this pizza app was literally just click it on and open the app up and do a repeat order. We found that actually it was really interesting because we've been using the emulators. And I think emulators only get you so far when you've got, that's great for writing the scripts, but you've got to test it on the real thing, right?
Definitely. Yeah.
And you've already got foldable apps, phones in your labs, right?
Yes, we have actually the two Samsung foldable smartphones, the Galaxy Fold X and the Galaxy Fold Z. These are two different form factors foldable smartphones running on Android 10. And they are not the only ones. LG just launched in the cancelled Mobile World Congress event. It was cancelled, but launches did happen. So LG, Samsung, and Huawei are the three early adopters of foldable smartphones. Android 10 as an operating system was the first operating systems in the market. iOS is still, I would say, lagging behind, but Android 10 came out with a baked-in Samsung emulator just for developers and testers who want to get started with these new and exciting devices. So definitely this is a challenge. These devices have a large price tag on them, over $2,000, which is not something that anyone can and wants to afford, but they serve a specific purpose. They serve as like a two-in-one, a smartphone and a tablet, both in one device. And they also provide users a much more flexible working environment, if you like, so they can work on multiple apps like they would do in a normal desktop. They can work on a smartphone and then they move to the working environment, which is the tablet, and then they have three applications running in the foreground in parallel. Okay, for those of you who are listening to this podcast and you are an Android users, you know that once you're putting an app in the foreground, the others go to the background. With foldables and Android 10, all the three applications are running in the same time, actually competing on resources on the same time. So you can think about a browser which you are looking for a restaurant. You talked about a pizza delivery. So you are looking for a pizza. You are opening the Chrome browser on the Samsung Galaxy Fold, and it launches let's say the Waze or the Google Maps application. They are all running in parallel. So you can see the menu on the browser and you can navigate to this location on the GPS application, all in the same time, all in the foreground.
That sounds like there's a whole stack of new possible challenges. I remember, being daunted by IRQs when they came out, and that, gave you that kind of ability to have a channel to request on. But if you're sharing resources like the camera, like the GPX information and the GPS, all these sensors, how well are they going to react with, multiple, applications accessing them at the same time?
Yeah. So the resource allocation, the resource management is becoming extremely challenging. And also keep in mind, Jonathan, the event management. When you have three applications running not in the background, in the foreground, and you're also getting a phone call or a push notification from an app or a message, everything happens at once for you. And this is not just from a testing perspective is a headache, but also from a user perspective. Users kind of needs to learn a new way of engaging with smartphones because things happen in parallel and they need to kind of prioritize. This is why, to your point about resource management, if an app that will be maybe docked as an always-on application won't behave properly, will drain too much resources and stuff like that, this app will be undocked quite fast and allocate room for a different one which behaves more nicely from an end user perspective. So this is definitely a mindset changing for both application developers, testers, but also for the users who now have a new way of engaging with apps.
Yeah, it's unbelievable how far things have come, and I remember this great example when I was working with you guys, and we were building a smart city application. So it was for the city of Copenhagen. It was this the ability to help them become carbon neutral by 2020, and then part of what it was doing was recommending the most carbon neutral route to work. So we paired up with you guys because there was no possible way that we were going to get that amount of devices that we needed, but with that variety, but also we needed this ability to inject the GPX so we could actually see these phones believing that they're moving around the city of Copenhagen. So, I remember working with you guys and Uzi around extending that capability, which was, just feeding that sensor data. And then we could run those devices, even though they weren't there, a bit like with the Pokemon kind of thing, but they could actually feel like they were walking around the city. And this was fascinating. And one of the things we did and we learned was because we looked at crowd testing and what we asked the Copenhagen University students to do is actually to have a GPX logger on there and start tracking, taking sample data so we could then create synthetic. Out of that delta, we could generate 4 billion different historical transactions for the smart city data exchange. So that way it had historical information in there of different routes and recommendations that it made. But one of the things we identified with Perfecto, and I don't think it would have been possible without you guys, was, the sheer battery drain. Because obviously we were sampling data and GPX information. And, nobody likes an app which, drains battery. If you've got 3 apps open, all looking and trying to access resources, and some of these things are quite heavy, especially when you start looking at augmented reality, like what Pokemon Go did. Part of it is it starts draining because it's using the camera. The processors are getting absolutely hammered. So, there's all these different aspects which I don't think people are completely familiar with, especially when they think about everyday use of their mobile app and what that actually means as far as resources. Do you find that there's either more sensor data coming out with these devices that actually you might want to interact with? Like, I guess, you always used to be able to tilt it, but can you tilt the individual dock screens, or, is there more functionality, like being able to allocate it to a particular window?
Yes. So, and I can share with you, Jonathan, for you to share also with the audience. I actually ran a webinar where I drafted an entire test plan, if you like, for testing foldable smartphones. So, in order for Android developers who are listening to this podcast, to have them join the party of foldable smartphones, because if you don't do anything to your app, the app will, when someone launches it, it will be launched, and when you close the screen or unfold it or fold it, it will probably go to the background. From Android Q, Android 10 and above, you have a flag in your manifest in the Android application to enable, if you like, multi-resume capability. It's like a new capability added to the manifest file of the Android app that enables multi-resume. Multi-resume is the enabler of 3 applications running in parallel. So you can see that an app can move from a pause to a resume state upon folding and unfolding the device. But if the multi-resume flag is not enabled, set to true, it won't resume automatically. Okay, so going to back to your question, you can define that a specific app, up to 3 applications, are located in a specific area on the screen, and once you enable the multi-resume, they will always be there upon closing the device or unfolding the device. This is something that mostly Android developers and testers need to know, both from a development but then also from a testing perspective. So split window, multi-resume, these are new terms that any Android application developer and tester needs to start getting used to from Android Q, Android 10 and above. And Jonathan, we are now in days that Android 11 is already in beta 2. So we are expecting late summer to see a new Android being released to the market, maybe with more foldables also being also introduced.
Yeah, that's really interesting because, I know the new iOS, they've got the new headphones that are coming on because they noticed the new icon. That obviously, if you've got the AirPods, you see the icon. They've got noise cancelling capabilities. So, the ability to do audio validation and input from the microphone. I know you guys support biometrics as well, things like Face ID. I saw the webinar you guys did with the guy from ThoughtWorks. Yeah. These are all different types of inputs, and, the ability to inject video and images, and also iOS, are looking at the new things like the eye glasses, right? So you're going to start having AR as well, and MR, so mixed reality capabilities where actually apps are going to start docking in the screen. As a proud previous owner of the Google glasses, that never really worked out. But this time round, do you see that actually? Do you predict that you're going to start seeing the kind of the mix between mixed reality start coming through down the line, maybe 2022 or something?
Definitely. I didn't start talking about 5G, but with 5G being deployed all around the globe. I think that you will start seeing much more advanced technologies, including AR, VR, large video streaming capabilities, smart cities, and everything connected, becoming more advanced and more adopted. I think that in the past, technology wasn't ready for devices like the Google glasses and other connected devices, IoT devices. I think that as 5G becomes widely spread, and I think we are already, I would say, in a 30 to 40% global spread of 5G. It's not perfect yet, but it's getting there. So I would say late 2020, as 5G is totally there, and you start seeing, even last February, Samsung and Apple, by the way, is also talking about a new iPhone that is being launched in September with the tag 5G. It's going to be iPhone Pro 5G. So I think with all these 5G enablers, you will start seeing, maybe in 2021, to be more realistic, a new range of technologies, connected devices, connected cities, healthcare, cars, everything that was talked about in the past few years as part of the digital transformation. Going back to your chapter, by the way, in my book, in our book, I think that this is happening. And I think that the 5G will be the barrier that, or the unblocker to this evolution that we will see.
No, I completely agree. And I definitely recommend for anyone, spin up Amazon now, type in the digital quality handbook. You can get it on both Kindle. You can also get it on as a physical book and also in color. And I'm sure if you ask Eran nicely, he'll probably give us an audiobook one day as well. But yeah, as jokes aside, but I know as a Tesla kind of owner now, the technology that's in there for self-driving, fair enough, there's still a long way before, we're going to get to be completely autonomous. But, even the Mini, you're starting to see these heads-up displays, but also with the Mini glasses actually have information about coming from the car around the speed, around the sat nav, all overlaid into the glasses. So, these things aren't that far away. And, once the technology's there, people will come up with new and exciting creative ways of doing that. But you're absolutely right. You need that 5G bandwidth to kind of remove the latency. And I remember, if you've seen my TED talk, there's in the background, there's this a really good example around Car2X and Infrastructure to X, where people are walking around a city and, it's giving you information about, keep off the road because there's a car coming, so it goes red. There's heads up information about the person who's coming towards you that or is maybe some of the predictive crime stuff that we did, or even coronavirus is saying please keep certain distance away from it, all that information being overlaid, the latencies have to be reduced. 4G was never really fit for that kind of thing. 5G is going to definitely see the increase of, infrastructure to M2M connections and this support for IoT. Do you see that, there's a lot more device interactions that, are upstream and downstream from a mobile device that people are doing, like, accessing, their TV, accessing their smart home, their smart office, do people test these to the level that they need to, connected car? And, I know the guys, when I talk to them at one of the German manufacturers, they still go in and manually test their systems, or use an emulator, because, it's difficult to have an entire car sat in your test lab. But, there's no substitute for physical hardware and not over emulation. Yeah. Is that what you're kind of seeing as well?
So I see a mix actually of things. So some of our customers, without naming them, from the automotive industry, are testing their smart set-top box, if you like, in our cloud. So they actually have a simulator that is basically the screen with all the technology that you have in the cars, hosted in the cloud, connecting via Bluetooth to devices, to a Perfecto cloud of devices. And they are doing a lot of not just voice, but also GUI testing, synchronization testing between the devices and the smart box that is baked into each of these cars. So I see that, and this is not the device or the mobile phone tested against the real car. It's against the box that is built into the car. It's as close as possible. And it reduces a bit, the overload that you have when testing it just manually. So I see a mix of complementary manual testing that is done within specific segment. You mentioned automotive. It can be also healthcare. We are also doing testing for healthcare with smart glucose connectors that are Bluetooth based, BLE devices that are connecting with smartphones to report back to the healthcare provider about your glucose levels, diabetes status, and stuff like that. So I think I'm starting to see, going back to your initial question, I'm starting to see more and more use cases that are across the verticals: healthcare, automotive, retail as well. One of the retailer that works with us has kind of a GPS baked capability in his mobile app that when you get into the stores, it can actually, based on your interest and previous purchases, can guide you like a GPS application to the exact same zone. So it will save you time when you're going to buy a specific artifact. So I start to see much more advanced capabilities in mobile that are also connecting to IoT devices. So definitely the innovation never stops, especially these days. And going back to the 5G comment, 5G network, resilient networks are enablers for such innovation.
Yeah, I was always, when the launch of 5G came out, I was really excited. But I also remember the 4G rollout for when I was living in New Zealand. And, there was a really good case which they had, which they used it as a test location. It was one of the first places to roll out 4G. And there was this small problem that everything rolled out perfectly. They got great connections, but then the emergency services weren't able to dial through. So people actually died from the rollout of 4G over in New Zealand. And it's kind of, you look at that kind of side of things of new versus old technology. And we were talking a little bit about it today in the sense of, unfortunately, due to kind of the coronavirus, a lot of what was retail systems are getting a lot more traffic. They're under a lot more load. I remember, we're going to get Todd DiCaprio on the show, and partly he came from Shunra for the network virtualization, and the first ever demo he showed me, which I couldn't believe my eyes with, was around just the additional load that was put on by latency, because the latency what was associated with mobile traffic meant that all your hardware is stuck waiting for that response to come through, and while it's waiting, it's not able to get on with other things. Now, yes, architecture's slightly changed now, but at the same time, what 5G is doing in essence is reducing that latency and that amount of time. So it's like a desktop equivalent. So you're actually going to start getting more load on systems with less latency, which means, there's going to be a different type of traffic profile. Are you starting to kind of see that as far as kind of what the data throughputs are on a device that is throttled at 4G versus 5G, and what that actually means for the kind of the round trip of a request going through to an end system?
Yes, totally. But I think that even before that, what I am mostly concerned about is, we are discussing, the network contribution to user experience issues, the adoption of 5G to enable technologies. But if you look specifically, and also from your own daily experience, Jonathan, we've just seen today some specific retail and healthcare websites, and I think that this concept of shift left and shift right as a whole topic, that's what concerns me the most today. I think that we are actually advancing this discussion while the market today, in my mind, doesn't really consider non-functional testing, and it's not just about performance, it's performance and security and accessibility as something that is equal in priority and importance, like any functional and regression testing that you are doing. I see it over and over again. You don't need to wait for this Black Fridays and other major events to see that websites, mobile web applications, hybrid applications are not ready for, not even prime time, for just something above normal load perspective. So this is my major concern today. What do you see from your own projects that you are involved in today?
Yeah, no, I'd say probably exactly the same thing. There's two dangers which I see. The first one is that mobile development, because of the technology that you're doing, doesn't always share the same as the full stack teams. There is some reuse. So obviously with React Native, I'm doing a project at the moment, React Native, but the e-commerce website is built on a different type of architecture, and maybe that's Ruby on Rails, maybe that's some other MVC kind of thing, but the app is a separate team, so they're going at different speeds.
Yeah. But
from a business perspective, whether or not they're doing bimodal, trimodal kind of approach to how fast they're releasing, this kind of ops dev approach of what is the operational state that you have to understand. So, the big one that I found the hard way was, Google Analytics doesn't support, information around mobile. You have to go through Firebase, right? So you're getting different metrics, which are the same metrics for the business. The business care about, if conversion rates and, retention and, people coming back, but they're getting data from two different sources. And then what that you're having to do is you're then having to pull that data together to then give you a kind of a view of why mobile and web should be a single pane. And I think that's a real challenge, because that's where people have got things like Snowflake, and they're starting to have data scientists to get and data engineering. This data engineering in test kind of roles kind of emerging, where they're having to get information from different sources of truth. And from an operational standpoint, the ops guys really need to understand, well, what is the end state? What are they looking for? What are they looking for as far as, you might have a McAfee from a security perspective. You may have some really snazzy APM. AI ops is obviously a big trend. So your Dynatracers, your New Relics, your AppDs, your Splunks in the world are taking all this data and doing your really cool stuff with it. But they're still treating mobile and web as separate streams of information. And that doesn't help when it comes to cascading KPIs and exec dashboards and understanding operational statuses of, well, what happens if this system goes down? How does the systemic failure work? This site reliability engineering and chaos engineering is something which I think people aren't really, extending out to mobile yet. Yes, they may be thinking about web. They might think, well, what happens if they pull down this particular node? Does it spin back up? What kind of data? How does it the fallback or self heal? But I think mobile is still is territory that people aren't completely familiar with. And I think, I was talking to you about doing some work around telemetry beforehand on embedding telemetry in React Native so that I can understand more about what's going on with the user, what activities are they doing? What are they interacting for? How long are they waiting for things to become enabled? And, what's the end experience? And I think digital experience analytics to me is the big thing where they pull in all these different data sources from APMs, from all these different tools from the IT operations landscape, and they start seeing a single pane of glass, of what's happening operationally and with their cloud infrastructure, their multi-cloud, across a different number of different providers, as well as hybrid as well thrown in just to confuse things. And, I think there is still a massive divide between ADM, so application delivery management, and dev, shall we call it, and then the ops side of things and the IT operations management and the speeds which both of those and the innovation that happens between both of those. So that's kind of where I'm seeing it. And I know you're kind of at the forefront of kind of AI and, AI within the test, but I'm guessing you've also seen what the AI in operations can also do and how that data kind of has to come together from a shift left and a shift right perspective.
I totally think so. Yeah, I definitely think so, Jonathan. And, just wanted to say something about the previous comment, the previous discussion on the network. I forgot to mention an important asset or important resource that I tend to go to when I'm, discussing with clients on things around shifting left, performance testing, user experience. So I don't know if you are following or you are using the OpenSignal website, but OpenSignal is it's free and it's a very good resource that shows you at any given time per geography, UK, Germany, Australia, whatever location that you think about, the current benchmark distributed by different telcos. So let's say for the US, you will get Verizon, T-Mobile, AT&T, and Sprint, differentiated by download speed, by 4G adoption, 5G, and other metrics, and it gives like a score, a benchmark per each category of network performance, and you can choose the top performing one and the least performing one as part of your testing strategy, but also you can understand some of the implications on your end users if you do not really test against these providers, because they will definitely suffer, and you have the ability to optimize on your end some of the the calls, the load, or whatever optimizations that you can think of in your app.
No, I think that's really great advice, and it's interesting when it gets down to this network level. And I was in France with someone who was talking about just the difference between network switches, in different sites for different organizations, and people are VPNing in now from kind of into their work offices by working remotely. You're starting to add these additional layers, whether that be Cisco or it could be your Citrix kind of thick kind of virtual desktop on demand. They've got all these different aspects which you've got to think about, but people are kind of expecting them to be able to run at kind of these fast response times. And you've got things like speed test, and there's a number of apps out there where you can capture what the actual traffic is like on a site. And I had this where I was sticking a Raspberry Pi at each one of our locations. It was a building construction company, and some of them were building in the middle of nowhere. So as you could probably expect, a bit like what we did with Copenhagen, when people got on the train from the airport, everyone was on the shared 1 meg connection that was free Wi-Fi on the train, and packet loss, time to retry, apps just wasn't dealing very well because not many of them have this kind of catch for, if they lose signal, you just get these really obscure kind of error messages. And, I think we can't get away with those things anymore because, people have less and less tolerance for mobile applications just not performing as they should do. And, especially recently, with everything that's going on, there's a lot more load coming through. And you've got people, we had Disney Plus launch recently, like this week in the UK. I know when it launched over in the States, they had a challenge with the sites, the service being unavailable. This is big brand damage for some of these kind of organizations. And, I think a focus maybe needs to move and shift away from, from the website side of things and focus more towards the mobile aspect, because, we're getting to that turning point where, there's more people using mobile, and yes, they may be using your website. But I remember looking on your site a Note 10, which had a huge resolution, and therefore when I opened Chrome up and went to the mobile version of a website, it was just physically unreadable. It didn't scale. I couldn't actually interact with any of the menus because they were too small. I think people still think that the easy way around is just to have a website that works with a mobile. And I think it's getting more complex than that. And, I said about, how such a big advocate I am for physical devices. We caught this error, which was, the emulators just wouldn't pick up, which was, we do 90% of our advertising through Facebook. Facebook loads a browser, which is window browser, which is a cut down version of Safari. It's not the whole, it's not Chrome or anything like that. Yeah. And on certain Android devices, on certain form factors, it literally wouldn't load. And, it was because of the capability of that in browser on that particular release of the phone. And, I just think, there's a lot of, cross-browser testing focus, but, nobody's, apart from you guys, have really nailed the cross-mobile or high-performance mobile testing. I really think that, most organizations that are out there really need to think about how do they make sure they know, at a bare minimum, you're going on to your Google Analytics, which everyone's got, you go in there, you're pulling your devices, if you've not downloaded already, I'd recommend to download the mobile test coverage that you guys put out, to tell you what kind of devices are typically in your region, what kind of split, and, literally make sure that you're getting the right type of devices. I've got behind me an iOS SE, because the screen factor on there is, is much smaller, and some apps just don't load. Yeah. And, it's amazing that these things are still happening. And, when I spoke to someone recently about it, and I said to him, well, Android still represents 1/3 of your users. They said, oh, well, we'll do the iOS first because, that's the one that everyone uses. And I was like, well, no, because if 1/3 of your customers, that's 1/3 of your revenues. Equally, if you're looking at the 2/3 of your revenue, which is iOS apparently, then look at the breakdown of devices, and you'll find that actually your older devices, your iOS 6s and your 7s, which are starting to get restricted on iOS version upgrades, are literally kind of getting end of life and are still having a really bad experience with the mobile app. So, there's so many things that people need to kind of take into consideration. And I think the mobile test coverage guide is an essential piece of work because, it changes from country to country. I remember last time I was in, so it is a Canadian podcast, this, but in Canada, people still use Blackberries because, it's still a device that's registered on there. Whereas, we've seen the end of kind of the Windows phones. It is a 2-horse race at the moment. But, do you see, things like an Android variation for your Hawaiis who are kind of getting pulled from being able to use the Google repository? Do you think things are going to start changing? You can see even more variation in the Android landscape.
Yeah, and the fact that you mentioned, the coverage and your experience, especially with the SE, as you speak, I'm, these days I'm authoring a new version of the index, of the coverage index report. And yeah, I think that at the end of the day, the end user does not care which device he's using or which browser he's opening. Is always going to blame the application vendor or the website designer if something doesn't work. He won't go back to Apple and say, listen, I'm using the iPhone SE and the app doesn't look nice on my device. It's the application developers and testers' responsibility to ensure that the app works. And you mentioned Google Analytics. The developers, the business knows at any given time which chunk of the industry, the target market, uses which application or which devices. So it needs to be part of a testing strategy that accommodates the coverage considerations. So that's definitely a valid point. So yeah, stay tuned for the next edition of the index. It will be a 2020 edition with all the considerations. And back to your point, on the mobile and cross-mobile testing, Jonathan, Perfecto gives you not just the mobile testing, but we also have like a Selenium grid in the cloud, so you can actually test across both mobile devices and desktop browsers, desktop virtual machines in parallel at the same time. So think about having a responsive web application today that obviously needs to run on any Android, iOS, tablets, and desktops. You can test all of them at once using Selenium on the Perfecto cloud. So it's not just mobile, it's mobile and web, which is the current reality, as we mentioned earlier.
Yeah, and I know, the continuous testing book which you wrote is a fantastic resource. I was a big fan of the quantum framework when it first came out, with this kind of the idea of having something like BDD in Cucumber in this case, and really start baking it into your developers kind of landscape. I think this is something that I personally recently got a bit more hands-on with, and there's so much variation of people using different IDEs, using different versions of Java, using whether they're using Maven, they're using Gradle. There's so much variation out there, and also in the CI, the continuous integration and continuous delivery tool sets. It's great to have this kind of low code approach to be able to actually start running against so many tests very quickly. If you go into the Perfecto cloud, you can literally run, click on the different gestures, you can do whatever you want, and then you can capture out the actual script out of the back of it. And I know you've done a lot around this kind of scriptless landscape, which is, it's fantastic, because otherwise there's just no way to keep up.
Definitely. Totally second that point.
And so I know one of the other things you've talked about, is the shift potentially from kind of Appium, which, to potentially looking at Flutter as a kind of a new way of doing cross-platform app development, which is done by Google. Are you seeing people, it's starting to ramp up the amount of people using the SDK for that?
being adopted slowly. I think that today still the majority relies on Appium. Appium has been out there for a long while, and people have the existing scripts. But I can tell you that for application developers that are just now starting to write a whole new mobile application, native application, or hybrid as well, they are looking at both, or multiple technologies. Flutter, in one hand, has the ability not just to provide you a cross-platform development framework, so you can actually write with one single code base an app that runs on iOS and Android, but you can also get underneath from Google a supporting test automation framework, quite similar to the Appium driver. So it's an alternative for new application developers. For the ones that are existing or they are maintaining existing mobile applications, I still see, Appium, Espresso, and XUI Test as the leading frameworks of choice.
Yeah, no, I love that. I kind of love that kind of flexibility which you've got, and I love how easy it is also to connect, reserve a device which you've got, and then be able to run that as part of your pipeline against a selection of devices that you just pass in the codes for. That makes it really nice and simple, especially within Appium. But one of the challenges that I think we were talking about before, but was this kind of things like crash analytics and stuff. You're starting to see a lot of the APMs out there offering the telemetry information to kind of give you more information about what happens when a crash happens, give more information about battery drain and device debugging information. Do you think that's going to be something we're going to start seeing more of as well? Is this kind of more information and insight that's coming out on user behavior of what's actually happening on a physical device, and maybe some of these APMs moving from synthetic tests, which maybe don't really prove anything, to actually start using real devices to make sure that the services are up and they are able to kind of connect to your secondary signing kind of capabilities with two-factor authentication, which you get with Apple and stuff. Do you think they're going to start using real devices to prove the system is working and the mobile apps loading the apps and the pages and the screens in a reasonable amount of time?
Yeah, I think, and I think that both myself and I think you as well, Jonathan, we're talking about this for multiple years now, and I think that as this entire industry shifts to digital only, especially these days, when we are discussing in the podcast, I think that digital has clearly won. And when we talk about digital, we're talking about physical devices, physical platforms that needs to work at any given time across different networks, capabilities, screen sizes, operating system versions, and stuff like that. So I think that we are past the excuses time, and it's now, every user expectation that things will simply work reliably with good performance, good functionality, regardless of the type of device, whether it's an iPhone SE with a 4-inch screen size or a foldable, or a new Samsung which has 6.9 inches screen. So it's no longer an issue. It simply needs to work. That's it.
Absolutely. And where people have spent so much focus on, making sure that their website is working and people optimizing maybe the checkout because there's, the bounce rate's high, you're going to start seeing that to, so people actually understand down to, well, what is the activities that people are trying to do on their mobile phone? What's the user behavior changing? How's it that behavior changing as time evolves? Because I think a lot of people miss this kind of, well, early adopters, they're more tolerant typically of issues, but then if you've ever read the book Bridging the Chasm, part of it is how do you get across to the early majority and the late majority and the laggards, where the big adoption is. I see so many new apps on the App Store that are incredibly promising, and then they kind of just if they don't work straight, they just get deleted, and it's a kind of a fire and forget kind of approach. And, some apps make it, some apps don't. and if you really want that engagement and you want people to keep on coming back, you've got to build better apps. And, I think, the only way they can do that is with real devices, and utilizing, the latest capabilities which you guys are offering. And I know we could literally talk about this for all day, but, have you got, I know you've got a upcoming event which you're doing on the 1st of April, which is going to be around mobile and web. Could you give the listeners kind of some of the things that they can start signing up for, ways to get in touch with you, some of the little projects that you're working on that you can share with people, and the best way to contact you?
Sure, Jonathan. So just to your previous comment on, I would say the one chance that you have with mobile apps, and that's, behind the second book that I authored around continuous testing. Continuous testing enables you to keep up with your end users' expectations, because you can get it right for version 1.2 and everyone would like it. It will rate it 5 stars. If 1.3 or 2.0 doesn't work fine, they will delete it. So you don't enjoy maintaining quality. You need to continuously maintain it to gain continuous customer retention. You fail once, maybe they will forgive you. You fail twice, definitely your app will be deleted. So that's just back to your previous comment. Regarding the upcoming things that I'm involved in, and for those of you who are not following me on Twitter, you can search Eran Kinsbruner on Twitter or LinkedIn, and feel free to connect with me. I accept everyone. So this is one. I'm going to run next week, April 1st, a webinar about why it's so important, especially due to the recent events that we are all facing. It's important to move your testing into a cloud infrastructure, whether it's mobile or web. You need to have a continuous testing mechanism engine that works regardless of anything else that happens around you, in your business, in the world. So it's all going to be focused on the benefits of a cloud solution as part of your testing strategy, and how to actually get started with testing in the cloud. So that's the upcoming webinar. Mentioned earlier as well, if you care about test automation coverage, as Jonathan highlighted, I'm authoring, and it's going to be probably out in May, a new version of the test coverage index featuring 9 different countries across all continents. So if you have a multi-regional application or website that you want to know on which platforms, websites, web browsers, and mobile devices to test against, stay tuned for the release of the next index. And also stay tuned for a potentially upcoming new book later this year. I will provide comments as soon as I can on that as well.
Wonderful. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on your show. And if you've not checked out Perfecto yet, go to perfecto.io to find out. It's a free trial. Literally, you can click up, register, and have access straight to the labs and devices, totally free. So I definitely recommend, it's the best in class when it comes to mobile testing. So, thanks so much for being on the show, and we will have to get you back talking about more future trends later in the year.
Looking forward. Thank you for having me, Jonathan. Thank you so much.